This morning, we basically had a group of about 30 elk that migrated down from the foothills into Mill Creek. And we did get reports about it, so we responded. And unfortunately, we weren't able to relocate the elk. They kind of scattered throughout the neighborhoods. So we're just at this point continuing to monitor the elk in the area, and we're working on a more long-term solution for how to handle them continuing to migrate into this area. So for now, we're just kind of asking residents in Mill Creek in particular to do a couple of things to help prevent conflicts with the elk while they're in the area. So kind of the main thing is just stay calm, right? Don't panic if you do happen to see an elk trotting down your road or in your neighborhood. And just make sure not to approach the elk and don't try to herd the elk away. Um, they will kind of just naturally regroup and migrate through the area if they're left alone, which is what we are hoping for, that they will just kind of go back, up to the foothills in search of food. Another thing that kind of brings up the second thing we're asking residents and others that may see the elk while they're here is just make sure you're not feeding the elk. Obviously, we recommend never feeding wildlife, but in particular, not feeding the elk because it can keep them in the area, which we don't want. We want them to migrate back up into the mountains. And then lastly, just asking residents to keep their dogs leashed. It sounded like when we responded this morning and we were trying to locate them and herd them out or, tranquilize and relocate some of them, dogs did kind of cause some issues for us. So just making sure your dogs are leashed or potentially keeping them indoors while the elk are in this area would be really, really helpful. Similar to other big game animals, elk can become aggressive around dogs. So just for the safety of your pet and for the safety of the animals, we're asking that people keep their dogs, under control while the elk are here.
Anytime wildlife in a herd is on a major freeway, how concerning is that to you guys just in the division?
Yeah, that obviously is a big safety concern, right? So that is one thing we're asking. If people see the elk back on I-80 or on I-215, kind of in that area is where they've been migrating down from the foothills, we do ask people to report that so that we can come and try to clear the freeways. That was similar to what happened on Monday, as they kind of came through and we worked with the Utah Highway Patrol. They were able to close the freeway so we could herd them back up into the mountains. So luckily at that point they hadn't come all the way into the city like they did today in Mill Creek. So it was an easier time to get them, back up where they should be. But yes, definitely people were kind of just making them aware, similar to a couple of winters ago when we saw this recurring thing with the elk coming down on the freeways here. They are back in the area. So we're just trying to make people aware of that fact and so they can slow down and just make sure you're watching for them so that we do avoid any accidents.
I know you guys track movements of wildlife and big game. Is there any indication this is members of the same herd from a few years ago?
Yes, in fact, we do have that GPS collar data. Some of the animals in this herd, we have been able to confirm are the same group from 2 winters ago when we had, again, that recurring issue of them migrating down looking for food. So our biologists aren't quite sure why they've come down this winter where there's honestly not a ton of snow. So it doesn't seem like it's, that's the cause for why it's pushing them down because most of the foothills, the snow has melted off, so they do have that available food source. But our biologists are just kind of guessing that they've identified some areas down in the valley that are a food source. And so that's potentially what's, kind of bringing them back to this area again this winter.
A few years ago, you alluded to the reoccurrence of this situation in that same exact area. Unfortunately, animals were hit. This was a big issue for not just a day or two, but really a couple of days and maybe even close to a week. But you also mentioned long-term solutions, and you've got these wildlife crossings, you've got things you've done, even just further up Parley's. What has been discussed about this area, given what happened, not just today, but is a reoccurring thing over the years?
Yeah, so one thing that had been, I guess, proposed for this area is potentially partnering with the Utah Department of Transportation to build fencing in this area to keep them from coming into the freeways, in particular I-80, I-215, kind of where that overlap occurs and the mouth of Parley's. But unfortunately, we have kind of looked at that, and it looks like that won't be a very viable option just because the sheer amount of fencing that would be required to even make a difference, it wouldn't really be feasible just due to costs and logistics and kind of where the freeways interchange, and there would still be openings. So that hasn't been a great option, unfortunately. We are still looking at some other things that may help, mitigate some of these recurrences in the future. But a lot of that is still kind of being worked through right now.
So this isn't an easy fix at this point.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a complicated issue, right? Because we want to make sure that wildlife are still able to make the movements they need to survive. But this is a very populated area, right? You've got two major freeways, you've got a lot of, people building up into the foothills and some of these natural habitat areas for wildlife. So, yeah, there's honestly at this point not a great fix. Crossings have been mentioned, right? That's kind of everyone's go-to for whenever we're seeing, animals on the freeway or wildlife vehicle collisions. But we also don't necessarily want to encourage or funnel animals into a major city. So that probably isn't a great solution either for this area. So again, we're kind of exploring a couple different options with partners and other stakeholders. But yeah, at this point, we're just looking for kind of those longer term solutions still.